Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Coming to you from the Long Valley studio in Washington, Utah, I'm your host, Dave Markel, and this is episode 181. Today's episode is a powerful, honest conversation with MJ, a university student in the eastern part of the country, a trauma advocate, and someone who chose to step forward and share her story after being inspired by the podcast, What They Don't Say. What you're going to hear is not just a story of what happened to her during her sophomore year. It's a real, raw look at how trauma can change the course of a life in just a matter of minutes. MJ talks about what it felt like to freeze, to disconnect from her own body, and to make sense of an experience that no one should ever have to endure. But this is a conversation that doesn't stop there. We also talk about healing, what it looks like, what it feels like, and how it's not the same for everyone. MJ shares her experience with dissociation, the role of supporting systems in those critical early moments, and the steps she's taken since, including reporting through the Title IX process at her university and exploring therapies that help her reconnect with her body in a safe, controlled way. Her voice, her insight, and her courage are going to stay with you long after this episode ends. This is a conversation about trauma, but it's also about resilience, growth, and finding a way forward. Here's MJ. Welcome to the show, MJ. Why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and maybe even what made you reach out to me and this show.
Yeah, so I listened to Shannon Porter's podcast, What They Don't Say, and that really resonated with me. And through that podcast, I had found this podcast, the SAS podcast, and that has led me to be on the show. I reached out through an Instagram DM, and I felt that I was ready to tell my story, talk about it. I thought it would be healing for me and also for other people. And so I reached out to Dave. We had a conversation, and here I am. And so I am from the East Coast. I am a university student now in my senior year, pursuing a psychology degree, and I am planning to work in a field helping others. I am very interested in trauma work and how trauma impacts the brain and the body, the mind-body connection. I am very involved in my university. I have a job here working for a nonprofit for mental health. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so excited to get to talk to you because it's not often I talk to someone who's working on a psychology degree, which is what my bachelor's degree is in. And I had, if you've heard any of my story at all, I have a huge interest in the impact of trauma on the brain and what trauma brain is all about and how memory works because of trauma and all of that. So we'll get to talk about some pretty cool stuff, I think, in getting into your story and into what you're doing and how you're managing and coping with the trauma that you've experienced. I think it's really commendable of you to reach out to me. And I'm a big fan of Shannon and the What They Don't Say podcast and everything she's done these days on social media. It's amazing. She's a huge influence on lots of people. So, and I'm glad you found me.
Something that I've found has resonated with me in a way that nothing else really has. Coming directly from a survivor to somebody else, it really allows me to feel like my experience was normal and not that it was out of the norm, that it was more in the norm, which is sad to say, but it makes me feel that I have somebody who understands it, even if I've never met them and they're miles away on the other side of the country.
MJ, I think I'd like to dive right into it if you're ready and okay. What are you able to tell us about your sex assault or rape experience?
Yeah, so my sexual assault experience happened during my sophomore year of undergrad, and I'm a senior now, and it changed the course of my life completely. I think that if that short few minutes of my life never happened, my life would be in a completely different trajectory, not in a good or bad way, just different. And I met the person that assaulted me in a fraternity. It was after a school event. We had a fraternity party and we had been talking for a while. We met in, I think it was around April. And then we had been talking through up until that summer and all of that. And then I come back for sophomore year, and we had discussed dating each other, and it was an ongoing discussion. I didn't feel that I necessarily had the time to dedicate towards him and what he was expecting out of a relationship. And he had a lot of time to dedicate and only wanted to be in a relationship and dedicate all of his time to that. And it was a lot for me to go back and forth and sleep at his house and do all of these things. And so it just didn't feel right from the beginning. It was really my first, I guess, real relationship, not counting kind of high school people. We then decided that we were going to date. And then a few weeks after that, he had a fraternity event that I went to with him. And then after that fraternity event, we had gone back to his house. I had planned to sleep over. And then continued to he continued to assault me through oral sex without consent. And after that night, I didn't know. It took me a while to figure out what had happened. I knew that it didn't feel right. And I knew that there was something wrong with the situation, but there was no way for me to leave. My phone was on the other side of the room. My body felt paralyzed, and I didn't have the words at the time to express what was happening. And after the oral sex had occurred, I still in his bed. I had slept over throughout the night, but I don't think that I actually ever fell asleep. Like the whole entire night, it was fear. It was this feeling of I have to wait until morning to talk to somebody about it because no one's awake in the middle of the night. I don't know what to do right now. I didn't have my phone. It was on the other side of the room. And after the oral sex had happened, he had continued to touch me inappropriately, and that made it worse. And so I kept moving, falling off of the bed basically to tell him that I was not comfortable with his touch, and he continued to do it, and he continued to see me crying and still do these things. And at that point I was just, I have to close my eyes, time will go faster. And so he had gotten off of me at that point, rolled over to his side, and he was like, well, I guess you don't want to do anything to me. I guess you don't want to engage right now. And he had finally gotten the hint that I didn't want to engage with him anymore. And that was when I turned over, and I was just, I need to close my eyes. Morning will be soon. And in the morning, I got lucky that he had an event that he had to get to for his fraternity. I stayed in his house for a little bit after, and I just kind of decompressed. I remember the first thing I did was that I texted a bunch of people, and I was just like, something went wrong. I don't have the words right now, but this is what happened. He did not listen to me when I said that I was in pain. He did not listen to me when I said that I did not want him to go further. That morning after was the most crucial, I think, because it was where I received the support from a few of my best friends. And he had driven me home. I waited for him to get home, but I'll never forget where after the assault had happened that next morning was just like, I was in my body, but I wasn't. I was just in his house, and I was just, what is going on? Like, I didn't know. I was like, okay, I have to do the steps of the morning. Like, I have to wash my face. And I listed this out to my friend in text. And I was like, I have to wash my face. I have to get dressed. I have to figure out what's going on. And I didn't have any food with me or anything. And I ate like ice cream out of his fridge. And I was like, maybe that'll make me feel better. I don't know. And I'm going to do schoolwork because that'll get my mind off of it. And I just waited for him to come home. And he drove me home to my dorm at the time, and I spent the entire day basically like decompressing, trying to distract myself, doing schoolwork. It never felt like it was going to get better. It was just constantly that feeling of that pressure of what had just happened. I need to put a name to this, but I don't know what it was. I never had like previous experience with sexual assault or a friend that really had experience with sexual assault, so I didn't know what was going on. And it took me a little bit of time to talk about it and start putting names to what it was.
MJ, I want to start by telling you how sorry I am for the experience that you went through. I really deeply feel for what you went through. I think the thing that impresses me in terms of hearing your story is the feelings that you had while it was going on. You're wanting to make it stop and it not stopping, but then you feeling like you said, I think, I'm not sure the way exactly you said it, but something to the effect of it felt like you were separate from yourself. And it sounds to me, from my education and experience in doing interviews and talking to people and learning what I've learned, is that went into a dissociative state. Does
Right.
does
Yeah.
that make sense to you?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's something that I experienced. So I eventually, after time had passed, I had about a year ago reported it to my university through Title IX, have gone through a process. And throughout that entire process, I have experienced a lot of dissociation where, especially when telling my story, when doing investigations, when during my hearing, there were just times that my body knows to separate itself from what's happening to protect me.
Yeah.
And I find that really cool. And then the other side of that is in my therapies. I do a lot of internal family systems work, parts work, and just somatic therapies. And in those times, I can come back to my body and really feel it in a controlled setting.
Mhm.
And I think that has been super helpful to some of the dissociation that I've experienced.
It helps process what happened, right?
Completely.
And puts things, like you said, into words. Whereas before that morning, even, it sounds like you couldn't even describe it to yourself. Like
Yeah, it was kind of just like I know something went wrong and I don't know what to name it, but I want to name it, but I don't know what the name is for it.
yeah, exactly. Are you able to tell me, in that experience, whether or not you felt an element of fear?
I don't think it was fear necessarily. I think it was just more sadness, like something had been taken away from me
Mhm.
rather than a fear of anything. I wasn't afraid of anything happening. I didn't even think at that point that it could like be like dangerous or anything like that. It never crossed my mind until a long time after, but it was just this sadness that engulfed my body. I didn't even have time to deal with because I was an involved college student. And there wasn't really time to be like, okay, I'm going to be sad and feel all of these feelings. It was like, I have 3 tests this week and I need to study. And so that powered me through that week after where I had these exams and I spent hours in the library and hours studying. And I did well on all of the exams, actually. I really focused my energy into that. And then it was a few weeks after that that I had gone home to my home state and finally had told my mom about it. And who at the time, I think she's come around a little bit, but at the time was not super supportive of it. And at that time, me and my perpetrator were still dating and we were kind of on a not talking right now break situation. And that kind of disrupted, I think, a lot of the feelings that were going on.
I find it interesting too that that morning after he left and you were processing, I get the impression from that dissociative state and the things that you described in how you felt and what you did in terms of texting friends, and one in particular listing the things that you knew you had to do, like your brain was trying to re-engage cognitively with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something that I do a lot. I if I'm upset or I'm in a more dysregulated state, I'll often be like, okay, I have to do this, I have to do that, whatever. And it's simple things. It's like, okay, now I'm gonna stand up. I'm gonna go to the bathroom and wash my face. Very simple steps of acting, and that helps get me out of it. And so my friend that I was texting at the time, she knew that about me at that point, and she didn't even mention it, but I was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to put on my body. This is where I'm going to sit and open my computer. And that kind of, I think, grounds me in what's happening.
Sure. What memory do you have about how the rest of that day went? What your overall reaction was cognitively and memory wise in terms of dealing through the rest of the day with that whole experience?
Yeah, the rest of the day, it was heavy. It felt really, really, really heavy. And I think that throughout this whole process of of my case that I've started, those days where I talk about the story more and I will discuss it with people, I know that they're going to feel heavier, and usually the day after feels heavier. Sometimes it could last a week where just there will be weeks where it's like this week feels like the week after my assault, and I just have to recognize that, and I kind of move through it. I know that when I got back from him driving me back, I was kind of standoffish towards him and got back into my dorm. So I lived in, at the time, a suite dorm. So it was two girls on one side, two girls on the other, and then we were connected by a bathroom. And we were all friends. And both the girls were home for the weekend. And my my like roommate that was right next to me at the time had her boyfriend that was there, and I was like, I'm just going to go in the other suite for the day and spend the day in there. And I took my computer, I left my phone basically in the other one, and I'm not going to engage. And I was like, I have so much schoolwork to do. I have 3 tests coming up this week. I just need to lock in and prepare for what's happening. And I remember though that I came back and I just felt so dirty and that I just needed to shower. And I probably showered 3 times throughout that day. I need to just continue cleaning my body because that's what felt right at the time. And I had stayed in the suite next to me for the entire day, stayed in my suite mate's bed at her desk doing my schoolwork. And every couple of hours I'd text my friend and I'd be like, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking about it. Like, get me out of this. I can't stop thinking about it.
Wow.
And then later that night, I had texted my perpetrator and I was like, I'm still sad. I'm still thinking about it. And he came back with like, well, what should we do here? And I was like, I need space for a bit. And I also remember that day calling one of my other friends and just talking on the phone with her about it. And she was like, yeah, that doesn't seem right. Like, she kind of reassured me that what happened was not right. And it took a lot of that, and sometimes it still takes that.
Are you able to recall when you were able to really label it, when you made this realization, I was sexually assaulted? Or did you until recently?
Yeah. I did realize it a few weeks later when I think that the biggest realization, I knew that something was wrong and that something was off, but the biggest realization I had was I went to the nonprofit that I work at. I went there and I talked with, it's a peer support model. So what we do is peer support. At that time I was volunteering. Right now I'm employed there as a peer lead. At this time in school I was very involved. I was, in a cappella, and I was in orchestra, and I was in a sorority, and I was part of a mentoring club, and I was part of this other organization. And I had all of these things on my plate. I had 5 classes. I were just all over the place, right? And I'm sitting in the library trying to study, and I just felt this such anxiety over what was happening. My thoughts were racing. I couldn't catch my breath. And I texted the person who was kind of in charge of peer support at the time. And I was like, hey, can I come in and talk to somebody? Like, is that allowed? I don't know. And I texted her and she's like, yeah, like, let's schedule a time. You can come in. And so I had brought one of my friends with me, actually. And I talked about what had happened. And she didn't label it for me, but she kind of brought me there of, this is what could have possibly happened. And that made me realize, like, yes, this is what I'm defining it as. I'm defining it as sexual assault. I think that as time has gone on, as I've gone through my case, as I've talked with my lawyer, gotten more into understanding law and all of that in terms of sexual assault, I have been more comfortable calling it rape. Not always. It depends on like who I'm talking to and what the context is, and how rape seems heavier than sexual assault sometimes for me.
Yeah.
So I usually will call it sexual assault, but I also know now that what had happened, if we're speaking in technical terms, was rape.
That based on, when you say technical terms, I'm guessing you mean by definition of the law in
Right.
terms of penetration and things along those lines. So it seems to me that when those realizations settle, there's a different kind of impact even then.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, so the impact of that was that I felt that there was more space to talk about it. I felt that I now had a little bit more of the words to talk about it. And at that time, it was me and my perp were still in contact. We were texting a little bit, but just about mundane things every day. We hadn't seen each other. We were just, oh, hey, I'm going to class. It wasn't super intense. I think that I then had the words to talk about it. I had ended up going home and I had told my mom what had happened, and that went how it went. But when I got back to school after that weekend, I was still texting with him a little bit, and we were talking about our plans for the upcoming weekend. And I don't really want plans. I don't really want to see you. I was at a sorority event standing with a girl that was in my chapter and kind of reading these texts that he was sending, and he was like, well, I want to hang out with you. We call them the outdoor parties that happen with the fraternities. And so he was like, well, I don't really want to hang out outside. I don't really like doing that. Like, let's go somewhere where it's dark, or like the way that it was phrased seemed very, very suspicious.
Mm.
And I read it to my friend and she's like, that's really weird. Like, think about that for a second. Like, red flag alert here. And it was in that moment that I texted another friend and I was like, listen, I am going to break up with him right now. And I had gone to this little outdoor park that we have near my campus, and I wrote a letter. And that was how I had ended up breaking up with him. In that letter, I wrote, you sexually assaulted me. This is why I'm breaking up with you. Yes, there's these other concerns of time and values and whatever else it was. But the concern in the letter, and it clearly stated, was you sexually assaulted me. You violated my body and you violated me. You did not listen to me when I did not feel comfortable going further. And this is why I'm breaking up with you. And I drove it to his house and dropped it off there. After that, he was like, this is not enough closure. And we had a conversation, but I stuck with my decision, and I have not really talked to him since then, unless it were through mediators.
There's two aspects of what you've just talked about that I find interesting and worth talking about if you're willing to. One is that support system that you had immediately that morning after you started telling some of your friends through text what was going on. And you said that they were like, yeah, that sounds like something weird happened, like something is off.
Right.
And and it's pretty well known through research and through experiences that when you have that kind of support system right after something like rape or sex assault occurs, the chances of recovery and getting through it are a whole lot better than if you get that negative impact right away of somebody saying, oh, you're imagining things or nothing happened,
Right.
or things
Right.
like that. Did you feel that way? Are you able to look back and say, now that I've experienced this, that immediate support system really helped in a positive way in the long run?
I think that throughout most of my experience has been positive in terms of support. There has been negativity. I've lost friends. I've been told this didn't happen to me. I've been told a case is going to ruin his life. I've been told all of the stereotypical things that you hear.
Right.
I've I've been told all of them. When I had told my mom, her first and pretty much only response was, "Well, why didn't you get up?" And that's so stereotypical, and that goes back into the science of the brain and trauma and how all of that comes together of why I didn't get up and why my body did that. But those few days after were so critical of having that support and having those people. And at that point I didn't tell a lot of people. Usually I'm somebody who tells everything to everybody all of the time,
Mhm.
and we call it chronic texting. But I am always like, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But it felt sheltered to me. It didn't feel like it was something that I was like, this is what happened. It was exhausting to tell over and over and over.
Yeah.
And so I had told it to a few people, and then eventually it had expanded to like my home friends that I told as a group, and there were some other friends that I had told and whatever. And I think that it's a pretty integral part of my life now, and people know about it, but they don't know, not everybody knows the details, or not everybody knows everything about it. If it comes up in conversation, most people just know I was sexually assaulted, and that's all that sometimes they need to know. They
Mhm.
don't even need to know the details. Even my professionals that I work with don't know the exact details. My lawyer is probably the only one who knows every single thing that ever happened, and probably the only person who ever will know everything that ever happened. I think that the support that I've had throughout the case experience has been amazing as well. My lawyer has been literally the most impactful person ever. And then my advocate has been super amazing. I had to change advocates because the first one that I had was not great. But now my advocate is really amazing, and my work support system is also amazing. Friends that I've met through social media, through talking about this, through being in this world, have been so supportive and just there to listen whenever I need.
Yeah. And that's critical, like we've said. But that issue, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but more of a typical way, is for most people who haven't really understood what rape and sex assault and the dynamics are of someone who's in a trauma situation and what it means to have your body shut down and go into some level of probably tonic immobility and not being able to move. But being in a situation where you hear someone say something to the effect of, why didn't you just get up? There's that victim blaming
Yeah.
mentality, that what I call a rape culture. It's not something that people do maliciously necessarily. It's just a very common reaction that if you're in a situation that you don't find comfortable or you don't like, then just get out of it. And
Right.
that's just not how trauma works. That's not how
And
that.
it's not something that they're gonna understand unless they've been through it, is something that I found. That the people who have been through it are the ones that they know what to say right away. They know how to treat things. They give you grace for ways that you behaved. And I think that's something that I've realized throughout the entire process. And I think a lot of people that run I Title 9, or they run criminal situations, have not been in these shoes, and they don't understand what trauma informed care is.
Right.
And the issue is a lot larger than just one school's thing. It's systemic change that takes a long time and a lot of education, and that's not always possible.
Yeah. Do you think your education has had a positive impact on your recovery too, or your healing journey?
I think that being in the world of mental health, and being, I don't know if my education specifically, but I think the experience I've had outside of my education, in terms of the work I've done, the internships, the people I've been surrounded by, the mentors I've had, have shaped the way that I am able to use my resources and the resources that I have access to. I ended up getting lucky with some of the resources I've used for this, but some of them have been me just knowing what's out there and being able to be pointed in the right direction.
I think that's a really unique aspect of your experience because so many victims and survivors don't have that opportunity, aren't exposed to that as you were in an almost immediate sense because you were already somewhat involved in that. Am I right? You had that
Right.
resource. And
Right, yeah, I knew about the original resource that I went to, but it took time. It took a long time for me to even think of the idea of reporting. It never really came to my brain until I'm with my partner now for around a year and a half. And when we had first started dating, this case was not a thing. It didn't exist. But my body knew whenever we would do anything sexual, I would panic, I'd freak out. I would not have any of the tools to deal with a new experience happening. That was my way of thinking that my body knows that this happened, because I deal with a lot of questioning of myself, and really, did this happen? Is it serious? When I was with my partner, when my body was reacting, I knew that there was something wrong. I wasn't like, well, my brain knows what it knows, but my body is still doing this. And that was kind of like, okay, like I am now going to report this because I'm sure that it happened because of the way my body is reacting.
I think it's intriguing and interesting that your reaction deals so much with that somatic aspect,
Yeah.
the body and mind connection. So, yes, there's that cognitive realization, but that can take, like you said, weeks, months, years for some people to make that cognitive connection and being able to name things what they are, label things, think things through, and remember clearly. But the body seems to know right away. And it has a lot to do, I think, with Bessel van der Kolk's work with the whole the body keeps the score text that he's written, which is amazing. But yeah, talk some, if you would, about that somatic aspect a little bit more in depth. I think it's interesting, and I want people in my audience to understand what maybe they're feeling a little better.
Yeah, the body definitely knows. And I think that we as a society are trained to not listen to our body. We're trained to constantly be on the go, constantly be running ourselves into the ground. If we're having a bad day, it's get up, go to work, do everything you have to do after work, go to bed, and restart. And there's no time for your body to really process. We don't take care of our bodies in the way that we should in terms of food, in terms of water, in terms of exercise, in terms of everything. That kind of plays a role into it, that we're trained to not listen to our bodies. But also for me, after I had experienced my sexual assault, I had experienced chronic pain, and I still experience some chronic pain, but it took from then, which was fall of 2023, until spring of last year, which was 2025, to figure out that after my sexual assault happened, my body triggered an autoimmune response, and I'm now diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And it took a lot of time to figure that out. A few months after I had ended up in the hospital with this chronic pain, it was almost around 2 years that it took to figure this out. But around that time, I'd probably seen or been to 85 doctor's appointments. And every doctor, I had to tell them that I was sexually assaulted because it played a role into what the puzzle was that they were figuring out. And I dealt with a lot of gynecological issues and a lot of pelvic issues that I didn't know were so linked to sexual assault. It took a lot of time to see the right providers and to see the right people who were going to understand what had happened, going to treat you with respect, and then also going to say, like, yeah, let's look into this. This might play a part of it. And I dealt with a lot of recurring infections, vaginal infections, and I dealt with a lot of pelvic pain in general, and they were diagnosed as UTIs over and over and over. And then there was no scientific evidence to prove that these UTIs were high enough to medicate, and they were never UTIs. They were diagnosing symptom based rather than evidence based. And it ended up that I had a different bacterial infection, took almost 6 months of antibiotics to clear it, change my entire vaginal biome, and then I did about 8 weeks of pelvic floor therapy. It was definitely in the beginning a little bit re-traumatizing, but it was so beneficial, especially to understand. I think it's important after a sexual assault to understand your body and be feel safe enough in your body. And so i I had done that pelvic floor therapy, and it took a lot of time to trust and to understand that the provider is not going to push you, or my specific provider was not going to push me. And that was really, really helpful. And combining that with the multitude of therapies that I do has been super, super helpful. And then, of course, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And so then I was able to go gluten free, and my body's definitely able to feel better. There's definitely days where I have pain and I'll just have a pain day, and it is what it is. But there are some days where if I see my perpetrator near campus, or if I am engaging more with the case, that I notice just more chronic pain that's in my body and feel that tension of where it might be sitting and all of that.
Wow, MJ, I am so thankful that you are courageous enough to talk about these aspects. It goes clear back to where you started, that just a few minutes of time completely impacted the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And while we didn't know that at the beginning of this in terms of those physical changes too, that's critical. And it makes me want to again tell you how sorry I am. It just is sad that you've had to endure what you've had to endure because someone made the decision to ignore your wants and needs and desires and to sexually assault you. To do something sexually against your will in fulfilling only what they wanted. And that aspect of rape and sex assault is something that I think the general public is just, for the most part, unaware of.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that still there's such a stigma around the idea of punishment for people who commit sexual assault or rape, and the idea of the victim being told, well, you're ruining their life, or you're taking away their freedom, you're using your power against them, or things that you hear. Well, they chose to do this. You didn't make them do that. They chose to sexually assault you, or they chose to rape you, and that choice is, they changed their own life.
Exactly.
They were able to make that choice, and they now have to deal with the consequences of that choice, the same way that the survivor would deal with those consequences of their choice.
Absolutely. And that feeds into what I've mentioned just a while ago, the whole concept of rape culture and the idea that it's the victim survivor that is the wave maker, the troublemaker, the problem maker when they make a report or when they decide to do something about what has happened to them. And the culture says, well, you're ruining this person's life, as you mentioned, or you're harming this person because of your decision to do something about what happened to you. It's just so wrong and backwards.
Right.
It speaks to a lot of why this show exists and why I teach what I teach and why I wanted to be trauma informed and educate law enforcement, prosecutors, and the medical field. I mean, as you brought up, it seems to me from what little you've talked about that there was a lot of medical professionals who aren't sensitive to what you've been through, who won't make that somatic physical connection with rape to physical illness. Jess Michaels, one of my previous guests, who was an Epstein survivor,
Mm-hmm.
talks about how it completely changed her physical life. And she's going through some of the same things that you are. I think we need to educate people about this. I want to talk a little bit about that. What do you hope comes out of your presence on this show and your willingness to talk about this way?
Obviously, the goal of making people not feel alone, making people feel that they have an experience to relate to, although no one's experiences are exactly the same. The feelings that come out of them are usually the same.
Mhm.
And there's only so many feelings that you could feel and so many names you could put to the feelings. And I think that helping people put names to their feelings is so important. And I think that giving people a voice is so important in this area specifically, where people are so afraid to speak up because they don't feel like they have that support, or they don't feel like they are confident enough in their own story. And it's taken me a while to get there as well. But I think that people who I've watched share their stories have brought that confidence to me, and that's something that I'd like to give to others.
You mentioned too, though, that at the beginning, this was something that you saw as a path towards some of your own healing. And I get that a lot. Even in the early stages of the show, emphasized that talking about your experience is a natural human desire to let people know, hey, I've been through something horrific. It's going to help me to be able to talk about it, but it also gives me the opportunity to help you maybe cope with something you've experienced that's similar, but
Yeah.
also maybe avoid situations that you may find yourself in. The education process is more along the lines of the fact that every rape, every sex assault is unique. There's no two alike, but what's common is what you just said, the outcomes, the feelings that you have, and even in the moment, the way the body reacts, that neuroscience aspect of what trauma does to the body and how the body and brain react to save the body. That's the brain's primary function, is to stay alive. Some of what you're talking about here, too, in the way you reacted, is that very aspect. We need to talk about the commonalities of the outcomes and even the aspect of what goes on while the rape is occurring. There are commonalities there too, even though those details, those circumstances are unique.
Right. There's so much education that needs to happen. And I think that the best educators are the ones who have experienced.
Yeah, like your connection with Shannon on what they don't say, and then even hearing this, you know, this show is based on my own experience of rape and sex assault, and then my later education through the law enforcement field and those that I've come in contact with who are experts in sexual assault research and trauma research and treatment. Can we talk a little bit about your treatment, what your therapy looks like, and where you are on your healing path?
Yeah. So I have a bunch of different treatments going on. And not only this, other mental health struggles and situations. But after the sex assault was when I had gotten this new therapist that I still work with now, just a regular talk therapist. And we have weekly sessions, just chat, not really about only this. I mean, we update and all of that, but it's just used as a way to talk through what's going on and to reflect and just like a normal everyday therapist situation. And then I have another therapist who is specifically trained in IFS, internal family systems, EMDR, and somatic experiences. And we do more of that internal work of where am I feeling this in my body? Let's do an activity to release this feeling. EMDR hasn't really worked for me specifically. I'm not a fan of that one, but the parts work really works. It's what part of you feels that way. Is it your 5-year-old self? Are you in your 21-year-old self right now, or are you in your child self? And I really, really relate to the parts work that we do. I really think that the work that we've done has brought me to the next level of healing. Last week, I was just feeling really sad about basically the assault and the case and all of that. And we just did, where do you feel this in your body? And I spent the session crying, and that was the release. She loves the big toe. She loves to bring the big toe in. We do tapping, we do EFT, we did where do you feel that? And I felt it in my eyes, and I think that made sense for what I was feeling, but she had me hold it in my chest with my hands, and then she said, when you're ready to release it, focus on your big toe, because you don't feel things in your big toe as heavy as you do the rest of your body. And that was just so helpful. That hour of my time for my week was so productive. And I also see a dietitian for eating disorder recovery. And that is super helpful as well, just keeping me on track. My autoimmune disease actually has brought me into such a space of eating recovery where I just feel like I'm in more of a recovery phase. Right now, I'm kind of spacing it out more, but it was for a while my 3 therapists a week. And then I, throughout my case, have really relied on my advocate, who is incredible, and my lawyer, who is also incredible, and just like an email of, hey, I need to chat, like let's just hop on a Zoom meeting, or I'll come to your office, or a phone call, and like I just need to chat, and they get it. Those two women get it more than anyone I've ever met, and that has been so important to my recovery.
I'm so glad to hear that, and happy to hear that you are moving forward in that healing process instead of being stuck. And I feel for those people who are stuck. It happens. It's part of the recovery process sometimes to get stuck. And there are ways to get through that. It sounds like you're working through your situation. I probably know that in your educational process and what you're learning, that you are aware that trauma memory is different than, I hesitate to use the word normal memory, but there is a difference between how our brains are functioning when they're in trauma, and the way trauma experiences are stored in the brain, and the way we are able to bring them out. I talk a lot about explicit memory and implicit memory, memories you have that are right there and able to recall and talk about, and implicit memories, which are memories that are actually in your brain. You just don't even know it yet. They haven't been activated. And what activates implicit memory is usually an explicit memory or something in our environment that activates through one of our senses: the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the touches. And we do things like, oh, I just remembered something that I didn't even realize happened, but I've never talked about it, but it just came to my memory. Those are implicit memories that have suddenly been activated. What will you do after this conversation is over and we're done talking and you're going to go through the rest of your day, if implicit memories come to surface, or even just the explicit memories put you in a state emotionally where you're reassessing your situation? How will you take care of yourself?
I Sometimes I purposely schedule therapy on days where I know that I'm having something heavier, so I have therapy later today, my somatic therapy, and that's going to, I think, really help. I often, if I'm having a day where I'm thinking more about this topic, I'll often just schedule something that's fun. I don't know, maybe it's getting a coffee, or maybe it's I'm going to get takeout for dinner, or I'm going to cook something that's really good, or maybe it's there's a dog at my work and I'm going to go pet that dog. And it's just activities that will take me out of this space, that are engaging, that are with other people, and that will be filling my cup up rather than draining me all the way.
In retrospect, we haven't even put any time between this conversation and how you may feel. But can I ask, how do you feel right now that you have been on this show, that you have talked about what you've talked about, and that you kind of, in looking forward to what the rest of the day and the rest of this week, the weekend, and going into next week may hold for you? What are your thoughts about having spent time on this show with me?
I think that it's productive. I think that I feel proud of myself for it, and that it is a way to speak about what happened and release it without putting it on blast. And it's definitely beneficial.
It's beneficial for me, and I know that it's beneficial for my audience. I can't thank you enough for having spent this time with me. In fact, I wish we could just keep talking, because it sounds to me like there's many, many things that you could enlighten us about through your own experience. And I'm hoping maybe even that you would consider coming back on the show sometime down the road.
Yeah, of course.
I would love that.
Yeah, totally.
MJ, this has been amazing. I truly appreciate you. I appreciate your courage and your strength in talking with me today. And thanks for reaching out to me and listening to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope you tell others about this, and you're going to have a small circle of friends that you probably do feel comfortable telling that you are on this show, and hope they listen to this. I know there are going to be a lot of people in my audience who relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, that's awesome.
MJ, thank you. This has been enlightening. Thank you so much. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to thank MJ for her courage, for stepping into a space like this and sharing something so personal, so difficult, and yet so important. These are the kinds of conversations that help people understand what trauma really looks like, not just in the moment, but in the days, months, and years that follow. Her willingness to talk about dissociation, about freezing, about that feeling of being separate from yourself, that matters. It helps people feel seen. It helps people realize they're not alone. And if you're listening today and any part of MJ's story connected with you, know this: what you felt, what you feel, it's real. And there's a path forward. It may not be linear and it may not look the same for everyone, but healing is possible. And it's important as a SAS listener to do your part to help bring justice to victims and survivors of interpersonal violence. One of the best ways to do this is to start by believing. And another aspect to this work is to help normalize this conversation. Share this episode with someone else, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.